And our first story here, of course, is, well, the Archbishop had an Easter message basically saying, do not live in fear. But he actually went a bit more and saying, Jesus conquered death, so why should we be afraid? And I'm not too sure if it's the reporting or maybe context is missing, because I wasn't necessarily there at the cathedral where he gave his sermon. But I do find his messaging somewhat interesting.
Jesus also rose from the dead.
Yes.
And I must be careful, because I don't want to seem as though I'm being blasphemous. But if you were to listen to his messaging, his Easter messaging on a whole, his sermon, then perhaps in that context it might make more sense. But just for the snippets that we've read based off of the news articles, then it's not very much inspiring. Now, we should not live in fear, or we should not lose our faith despite the economic and social challenges of the country. He says, what are you most afraid of? Mostly afraid of death. What about rejection? Not having enough to live a decent life, lose your job, lose your health, you can't support yourself. Those are your big fears. If our biggest fear is death, and Jesus has conquered death, what are you really afraid of? Mm-hmm. We should not live in fear.
I think it was more like an analogy. Like, we should not be afraid of death. Therefore, don't be afraid of a whole host of these other things. The irony, of course, is me saying that, if my interpretation is correct, is that given the crime situation in the country, people have a very real reason to be afraid just in general. The amount of crime that I saw at a glance, I didn't even really go that deep into the news the last 4 days. Just at a glance, I found a bit alarming. It was as though, there were no breaks, no days off for criminal activity. It was very unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Well, from the time that we closed our laptops on this show last week, Thursday morning, till the time we opened them this morning, the news has not been very good, to say the least. It's just story after story of murder, of rage, of death, of blood being shed, of people being beaten. And the thing is, whilst I understand that the Roman Catholic Archbishop is doing his best to try and instill some level of spirituality and faith in society to try and conquer the situation and get over it, people reading it for the very first time may not take too kind to it. For example, do not live in fear of losing your health, of losing your job, of not being able to support yourself. My response to it would be, though I worship God on a daily basis, and though I am spiritual and say my prayers, people are not necessarily giving donations or funding or offerings to me. And therefore, I have to be fearful of what if I can't pay my bills at the end of the month, as much as I budget. Companies are raising their prices all the time.
I think there's a difference between being responsible and having a healthy concern or even fear of disaster, right? Not necessarily natural disaster, but disaster in the sense of something significantly large goes wrong with regards to my life, with regards to my job, with regards to my house. It could be due to a natural disaster. But I think what I believe the point that he was trying to make is ultimately we can't live in fear and let that fear paralyze us and let that fear overwhelm us and be obsessed with that fear, which some people might actually do. It's very unhealthy. Then again, I don't think, and it could be interpreted this way, it's one of those things where I believe Christians and religious people need to be careful, because that whole why are you afraid of death? I think therein lies a much more personal question with regards to belief, as well as the fact that, look, we could all end up in the promised land at the end, but there is still something primal and very real about having someone ripped away from our lives or being ripped away from the lives of those around us.
I think people think about it too from, if I die, what happens to my family?
Exactly.
But I mean, I will take with good faith his messaging. Think about it this way, Sean. Following a church service, such as this sermon, or following even this show, what do? We say, okay, great, don't live in fear, fine, no problem. You get in your car, you be very careful on the road.
Yeah.
You drive home. When you get home, you look all around your surroundings 2-3 times before opening your gate or before getting out to open your gate. You get into your driveway. You check all around before knocking your door, before coming out. You get out, you lock your car door. You open your burglar proofing and your auto iron to get into your house. You lock that back. You lock your door again. And again, even if you hear the slightest noise which seems odd or that the dogs in the neighborhood starts to bark, you're looking out. You're keeping an eye out. And the issue is, as much as we do not want to live in fear, being a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago now, you live with fear. Fear is your next door neighbor. Fear is always in your house. Given the fact that we're living in such difficult times, and that is a very polite way of saying it, you cannot help but understand that there's no separation between us and fear. It's just one.
And I cannot disagree with you, because literally that is part of my routine, particularly coming home, to a lesser extent leaving the house, but particularly coming home. We got an electronic gate, not because we wanted something fancy and expensive and a bigger gate. We had, for years, the same small, open by hand, wire mesh, well, not so much wire mesh, but, gate. And, well, we were the victim of a crime. Well, my mother was directly, and it caused her to want to and institute better or stronger security measures around the house. And it wasn't the first time. Some time ago, when we were in Tobago, we were burglarized, and same thing, all of the burglar proofing, you wrought iron, they were just stacked upon stacks to the point where you have to wonder if this is too much, if this is even safe. But it felt necessary, because you leave one opening and then somebody comes in and then...
Put it this way, Sean. It is for that very same reason of which you just described that my family implemented an electronic gate system. Listen, as a kid, I used to look forward getting home, getting out the car, and sliding the gate. I actually used to look forward to that. I don't know if other kids look forward to that, but I used to. We had to get an electronic gate out of necessity, not out of desire, but out of necessity.
Yeah.
And even burglar proofing, you're right. The amount of burglar proofing now that you need in your house is a hazard in itself. Because though you need that level of security, in instances where there is an emergency or perhaps a fire, trying to scramble to get out is an issue.
Basically, because of a fire. So, folks, not necessarily to put down what the Archbishop was trying to say, but I guess it's one of those things where in complex societies with complex problems, simple messages aren't always the most effective, because as much as we are bringing up these things, Joe Public that might hear it and disagree with it will be 10 times harsher, will bring up 10 times more many arguments to say what he's saying and it's foolishness, and he living in this country, boy, how we could be saying that? That don't make sense. I had to do this, I had to do that, I had to be worried about this, I had to be worried about that. So, and then there's also the factor where we don't know the individual circumstances of which everybody lives in. But I appreciate what the Archbishop was trying to say. Perhaps he should have just been a bit more careful with saying it.